Tēnā koutou na mihi nui ki a koutou I tēnei pō. No mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. I ngā mana, I ngā reo, I ngā karangatanga maha, kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. Ka reri atu aka mihi ki te mana whenua, hi mihi hau tūpū tēnei ki a koutou. Ko āraki toko maunga, ko waitaka toko awa, ko murahiku ti rohi, ko nai tahu toko iwi, ko Gail Gillon toko ingoa. Ko au ta amarangi o te kahui pā harakiki o te whare wānanga, ko mihana mātua o Aotearoa mo UNESCO hoki, nā mihi nui ki a koutou. Well, kia ora everyone and good evening and welcome to our event this evening. It's fantastic to see you all here. Welcome in from our kura, our schools, from our community. I've acknowledged our leaders and our speakers this evening, and it's fantastic to have you all along this evening. Let's begin with a wonderful karakia that our youth leaders have chosen for us tonight. So, etu. Tui ki runga, tui ki raro, tui ki waho, tui ki roto, tui a ki te haere tangata, ka runga te pō, ka runga te ao, haumi e, hui e, tāhi ki e. Well, kia ora everyone, I'm Gail Gillon. I have the honour to be our New Zealand UNESCO Commissioner for Education and hosting this evening, and it's fantastic to have you all here. But I'd like to begin by introducing our chair for New Zealand UNESCO, Liz Longworth. Liz has had several years, in fact, most of her career, in fact, really serving this amazing cause for our United Nations and UNESCO. She's held several leadership positions around the world, in Geneva and in Paris, and we're very honoured to have Liz as our chair for New Zealand UNESCO. Kia ora, Liz. Come and please say a few words of welcome.
Kia ora, and thank you, Gail, for that warm introduction. No mai haere mai, ko Liz Longworth aho. As Gail said, I'm the chair of the New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO, and it's my great pleasure to say a very, very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us, whether you're in the room here or online. We are here today to discuss the very important issue of climate action. So we are delighted that you have made time to join us today. And as you may know, UNESCO is the United Nations educational, scientific and cultural organisation, has a responsibility to try and promote and coordinate international cooperation in 5 domains: education, natural sciences, social sciences, culture, communication and information. And with 194 member states, it is actually among the largest, if not the largest, UN agency in the system. I just have to put that in. Our role as the National Commission is to represent New Zealand to UNESCO and UNESCO to New Zealand. And what we mean by that is we contribute the best of New Zealand's expertise to the work of UNESCO, and then of course that gets amplified to international audiences. And then we take the best of UNESCO's collective resources, networks, programs, connections, and we apply them in a way that benefits and adds value to us here in Aotearoa New Zealand. So we're really delighted to be hosting this event to share international perspectives on climate change education, and during which we'll highlight the outcomes of the Youth Forum, the 14th Youth Forum that was held November last year. And this important gathering focused on the theme of climate action and social impacts, particularly on our rangatahi or our young people. I can't resist a little teaser. The Youth Forum, which we're going to hear quite a bit about soon from our keynote speaker, Isaac, comprised 145 youth delegates from 135 countries. So that is actually quite a big deal because these participants were all chosen by their countries. We're also organising this discussion in the context of New Zealand's current consultation on the draft science curriculum content for the school years 0 to 10. So we're hoping that today might stimulate further discussion, reflection and connection. So I'd like to acknowledge a few people. We have 5 commissioners, and as well as our very talented moderator, Professor Gail Gillon, who you've met, as our Education Commissioner. We also have our Commissioner for, there she is, Natural Science, Linda Faulkner in the room. Hand up, Linda. That's it, thank you. I was going to make people stand, but take too much time, so you got off lightly. Linda's been leading our work program on the United Nations Decade on Ocean Science and serves on its Global Advisory Committee. This is critical work, especially given New Zealand's dependency on healthy oceans and the existential threat posed by a changing climate on ocean wellbeing and sustainability. And also present, there she is our Communication and Information Commissioner, Masa Macaulay, one of New Zealand's leading experts on digital technologies, especially AI. Hand up. There she is. Thank you. Thank you. And we have 2 other commissioners, Laura Black for Social Sciences, who unfortunately couldn't be here, and Dan Hikaroa for Culture, and I'm sure they'll be joining us online. So I'd like to do a shout out to our friends in the National Library for making these premises available. The National Commission has a number of partners, including the Royal Society, which I understand is represented here today. And we're soon going to meet our amazing team of youth leaders who are very committed to our work program on climate action. In fact, they advocated very strongly for our strategic plan to reflect this focus. And I would also like to acknowledge the mahi by our hard-working National Commission Secretariat, and Vicky and team have done the heavy lifting on preparing this event. So there's another wee background point just to tie things together in terms of context. You'll see it'll be illustrated by Isaac, who's doing our keynote, that it's also the United Nations Decade on Indigenous Languages, which of course has a very strong relationship with Indigenous knowledge. And of course, Indigenous knowledge has a deep connection with issues such as climate risk that impacts our environment and sustainability. So as a final thought, this event is very much focused on rangatahi. We all have a young person somewhere who will inherit our legacy on a dangerously warming planet. So I have a question for you. Do you worry, as I do, about the preparedness and knowledge of this younger generation? Speaking personally for my family, our daughter will be 44 in 2030 and 64 in 2050, and our grandchild will be in her late 30s in 2050. And you know I choose those dates because they are key dates in climate projections. So I ask myself, what is going to become of them in such a radically changed world? What's going to become of our communities, our society? If climate change is the existential crisis of our time, what does this mean for our education system, our schools, our curricula, such as the science curriculum currently under development? So I'm going to leave those questions hanging as I hand over to our Education Commissioner, Gail, who's going to introduce the themes, and she's going to moderate the discussions today. I want to thank you again most warmly for your interest and your participation, and I look forward to being able to connect in person afterwards, where you're all invited for some refreshments. But first we have some hard mahi to do in terms of getting our heads around what's coming. Thank you very much.
Well, before I begin with our presentations, I would like to introduce our youth leaders for 2026 to you. As the New Zealand National Commission, we've had a long and proud history of ensuring that we involve the voice of our youth and our rangatahi in our work. And we've successfully recruited and engaged some very talented and passionate youth. Our youth leaders, when they join us, between 18 and 25, and they stay with us to support our mahi, often to represent us internationally. And you're going to hear from Isaac and his amazing trip to Uzbekistan. But they also do really important work in our communities. So it's a great pleasure to introduce you first to our 2026 youth advisor, or the leader of our youth team, Sayavan Sitsebastian. So Sayavan, would you like to introduce your team for 2026? And we hope that in the refreshments you'll have a chance to meet our youth leaders for this year. Kia ora.
Thank you, Gail. It's a great privilege and honour to introduce the UNESCO Aotearoa youth leaders. Could I get the youth leaders to stand up wherever they are? So we've got Mary over there. Mary, we've got Mary over there in the far corner, and we have Zana right here, and Rin, and Tara has appeared to have gone missing. She back there, yeah. But we're also joined by Wesley and Mediha, who could not make it tonight. Thank you, Gail.
And there they all are up there. So a fantastic team to support our UNESCO work here in Aotearoa New Zealand for 2026. But now it's my honour to introduce you to our 2025 youth leader and a special advisor, Isaac Morunga. Now, Isaac is an incredibly passionate and talented young man who had the great honour of representing us at the 14th UNESCO Youth Forum in Uzbekistan last year. And this theme for the Youth Forum was indeed on climate action and social impacts, particularly for our young people. As well, Isaac was a full member of the delegation for the General Assembly of UNESCO last year. And from the over 145 young leaders that were there, Isaac was one of the 6 chosen to represent those views of the forum back to the Assembly. So it's a great privilege to have you here tonight, Isaac, to share with you some of your reflections from that, but also to put that in the context of the amazing privilege we have at the moment to feed into our refreshed science curriculum for years 0 to 10. So this is a great opportunity to influence what our young people are learning about and to start those conversations. So please welcome to the podium, Isaac Morunga.
Kia ora koutou e te whānau. It doesn't matter how many times you do this, you always get nervous. I've been shivering in my seat, but I'm sure I'll be okay by the middle of it. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko rangiputa rawa ko pangaru oku maunga, ko te awa rawa ko hokianga oku awa, ko te raroa rawa ko ngāpui oku iwi, ko Isaac Morunga toko ingoa no Tamaki Makaurua hau, no reira tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Isaac Morunga, a proud descendant of Ngāpui and Te Raroa Iwi, based in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. I currently work as an account strategist at Google and have recently concluded an amazing 3-year term with the New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO. Given the immediacy of the global climate emergency, it is vital to ensure rangatahi have a seat at the table when making decisions concerning the very future they will inherit. It is my honour today to share the reflections on climate action from the recent 14th UNESCO Youth Forum in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. I have also enjoyed, maybe that's one word to use, reading over the 150 pages of the New Zealand Draft Science Curriculum, a series of critical documents that will guide teaching in classrooms for years 0 to 10. Considering the Ministry of Education's current consultation period, I would like to offer my initial thoughts on how this curriculum can effectively integrate and drive climate action. When I first stumbled upon the UNESCO Aotearoa Youth Leaders Program, I knew the organisation only for its World Heritage sites. But as I prepared for my application, I found a deep, visceral alignment with its core pillars of education, science, culture, communication and information. Pillars that have shaped my life and the very tools that UNESCO uses to build where it matters most, peace where it matters most, in the minds of humanity. I'm incredibly proud to stand alongside the current cohort of UNESCO Aotearoa youth leaders tonight. Leaders like Sayavan, Mediha, Mary, Rin, Zana, Tara and Wesley. They are not just leaders of tomorrow, they are the experts leading our communities today, negotiating inclusive ways for young people to stay empowered in every pillar of UNESCO's mandate here in Aotearoa and further abroad. The climate crisis continues to intensify. In 2024, Earth reached its warmest year in 125 years, with global temperatures rising 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. This global temperature increase manifests as devastating fires, mass displacement, and rising eco-anxiety. More than just an environmental challenge, climate change is fundamentally a crisis of justice and equity. It severely undermines fundamental human rights, including rights to food, water, health, housing, and life itself. The impacts disproportionately burden young people, particularly those from marginalised and vulnerable communities who face additional and multiple forms of discrimination. Understanding the impact of the climate crisis on Indigenous communities is critically important. Last August, I had the privilege of co-leading a UNESCO youth session on Indigenous approaches to climate change and meaningful youth engagement, alongside two of our powerhouse leaders, Mary Edemia Allen and Tara Shepherd, presenting to UNESCO youth delegates from all over the world. During that session, Mary brought the Pacific into sharp focus, reminding us that rising seas don't just erase shorelines, they threaten to wash away language, culture, and the very identity of a people. Driven by the urgency of climate action, a global community gathered in Samarkand, Uzbekistan in October 2025 for the 14th UNESCO Youth Forum, focused on climate action and social impacts, particularly for young people. 145 participants from 135 countries stood together to forge document 43C, INF 13, a blueprint for a future that demands immediate, decisive action. As we declared with one voice, the time for simply listening has passed. The collective work we achieved in Samarkand has set a global direction. I bring these calls to action here today because we know that true climate justice is threefold. It must be intergenerational, we must partner with Indigenous, and it must be unapologetically youth-centric. We are here to weave these global threads into the unique local fabric of Aotearoa. There is no greater opportunity to do so than right now as we reflect on our draft science curriculum for our young learners. Our goal must be to ensure that our akonga inherit a scientific worldview that doesn't just teach them about the world, but equips them with the wisdom and tools to lead the one we should fight to save. Before considering the draft science curriculum, I would like to highlight some conclusions from the 14th UNESCO Youth Forum. These are key points that youth are calling on global, regional, and national decision makers and stakeholders to urgently address. First, we must fundamentally shift who holds the pen. It is time to move beyond symbolic seats and into meaningful influence by establishing a 30% quota across all climate decision-making processes. But a seat is not enough. We must back this with the technical training that ensures our most underserved rangatahi have the skills to lead from the very front. This leadership must be fueled by an education that is for the world, not just about it. I am calling for a curriculum co-created with youth, one that embeds Indigenous knowledge systems directly into the classroom. We must move beyond just abstract theory and equally prioritise learning that builds disaster resilience and delivers environmental justice. To turn that learning into legacy, we must bridge the gap between the classroom and careers. We need to scale youth climate labs and innovation hubs to provide the actual grants and mentorship required to sustain knowledge systems. This funding must be non-earmarked and accessible to those on the front lines and our most underserved youth. In the digital age, agency is inseparable from digital equity. We must establish renewable-powered digital hubs in our rural and Indigenous communities, particularly to support digital transformation and access. We must protect the intellectual property rights of our young scientists and make media literacy a core part of every curriculum to combat the rising tide of climate disinformation. We cannot ignore that the climate crisis is also a mental health crisis. Our survival depends on our collective resilience, which is why we must integrate psychosocial support into our schools to address the eco-anxiety felt by our youth. Our rangatahi are the most credible voices on this. We must involve them in developing the health programs they rely on. This alignment is why UNESCO is actively developing work streams to address the intersection of climate and mental well-being. Finally, we cannot allow our ancestral stories to be washed away. We must centre Indigenous youth in governance and pair our elders with our rangatahi in formal, intergenerational mentorships. We must ensure research and policy respects the right to free, prior, and informed consent, protecting the ecological wisdom we cannot afford to lose. I would now like to offer some reflections on the draft science curriculum that is open for consultation. Mā te whakaaro nui e hanga te whare, mā te mātauranga e whakau. By great thought the house is built, by knowledge it is made firm. This whakatauki is the first thing you see when you open the resource page for the draft year 0 to 10 science learning area. It is a bold commitment that if we invest enough great thought into our science curriculum today, we can offer our akonga a foundation that is both solid and enduring. But as I look at our current science draft for years 0 through 10, I must ask, is the house we are building for our akonga truly designed for the climate they are inheriting? One of the most profound conclusions from the 14th UNESCO Youth Forum was that global climate science has long been operating with a missing piece, and that is the integration of traditional and Indigenous knowledge systems. Our draft curriculum's purpose statement acknowledges this, framing science as a human endeavour shaped by people from many times, places and cultures, and explicitly stating that diverse perspectives, including Te Ao Māori, can enrich scientific thinking and practice. While the current draft begins to build on this foundation, there is significant opportunity to evolve these concepts from mere observation into active, resilient practice. In the early years 1 to 6, the curriculum focuses on the prerequisites for stewardship. We see this in year 2, where the concept of habitats is introduced, and we weave in the lens of whakaotirangi's horticultural mastery. In year 4, where matariki is taught as a foundational system for our environmental observation, and in year 5, where the maramataka is a traditional Māori lunar calendar based on the cycles of the moon and stars. However, we can strengthen this foundation by addressing its current gaps. In year 2, the story of whakaotirangi should be evaluated from a historical curiosity to a lesson in intergenerational knowledge transfer, demonstrating how elder to youth wisdom serves as a legitimate scientific method for survival. As a new addition in years 4 to 6, we must broaden our scope to ocean literacy. Beyond just studying tides, we should introduce the rahui system, a customary practice where temporary closures allow reef ecosystems to recover. This demonstrates that conservation is not just a modern regulation, but a sophisticated Indigenous method of biodiversity protection and resource management. As students enter year 7, the curriculum introduces the impact of human presence, requiring the evaluation of human activity and identifying kaitiakitanga behaviours such as planting and resource management. Yet year 8 remains notably void in terms of climate and sustainability overlap. This gap can be bridged by introducing a climate health nexus within the study of gas exchange at year 8 by linking respiratory mechanics to the physics and emotional impacts of climate disasters. We help students understand that their well-being is inseparable from the health of the planet. It is here that we truly breathe life into the whakatauki, ko Aotearoa, ko te awa ko au, I am the river and the river is me. As a new addition in year 8, I suggest exploring legal personhood for nature by studying the status of the Wanganui River, or Te Awa Tupua, as one example of a living ancestor. This challenges the view of nature as a resource and provides it an additional perspective as a member of the community with its own rights. By years 9 and 10, the curriculum shifts towards the mechanics of how the planet regulates itself through carbon and water cycles, leading into the explicit study of climate change and ocean acidification. We meet pioneers like Marama Muru Lanning who link Indigenous perspectives to modern ecological science. This is where we must move students from observing science to leadership in science. In year 9, instead of just observing environmental indicators, students should engage in policy dialogue, analysing how these signs are integrated into regional climate adaptation plans. And as a new addition in year 9, when students use data modelling, we must embed the ethics of artificial intelligence, analysing whether these digital tools uphold human rights and foster trust, ensuring that the technology of the future is ethically grounded and morally just, as well as unpacking the environmental impacts of AI technology. And in year 10, we must acknowledge Indigenous governance, modelling the importance of Indigenous and Māori leadership as true partners in climate governance. As a new addition in year 10, we must establish youth climate labs. This shifts the curriculum from theory to sustainable entrepreneurship, where students design nature-based or clean energy ideas on a local, regional, or national scale. Finally, if we want this foundation to be truly firm, we must be honest about the stories we are telling. The learning area structure of this curriculum explicitly states that science is a human endeavour of collaboration, creativity, and discovery, engaging hundreds and thousands of people worldwide. It claims that highlighting prominent scientists and their values enriches the teaching of knowledge and practices. But when we look at the 82 humans highlighted within the draft, we see a story that is still being told through a very narrow lens. 88% of the named individuals are men and 94% are of European descent. We see only 3 named Māori individuals across 10 years of foundational science education. From the classrooms of Westport to Akura Māori in Northland and the schools of Christchurch East, we must ask what a young girl sees when she encounters this list. Whether she is Māori, Pacifica or Pākehā, she is met with a history that suggests scientific discovery is a male inheritance. She sees a version of the world where the names that changed history really sounds like her or looks like her. We are missing the celestial navigation of the Pacific and sophisticated soil engineering of the first Māori scientists, but we are also missing the voices of the women who have always been the frontier of Western science. Lean into the human stories of this curriculum, but do not feel limited by the names printed on the page. Use those names as a starting point, then challenge your students to find the names that are missing. Remind them that the reason we study the founders is not just to memorize their laws, equations, or discoveries, but to understand that the story of science is unfinished. Let us make sure all our akonga see themselves in the scientific foundation we are building today. The 14th UNESCO Youth Forum proved that young people are not waiting for permission to lead. From inclusive climate alerts for the deaf in Zambia to culturally rooted disaster education in India, the work is happening, and even in our own backyard, there are many youth-led organisations focused on making tangible impact and combating climate change. To the principals and educators here, our science curriculum is a start, but it is not yet the finish. Do not wait for Year 10, do not wait for the climate module. Use the interdisciplinary connections available right now. If we want our akonga to be the prominent scientists of the next generation, or simply citizens of science that are aware and conscious of the human impacts on the environment, they need to absorb a science that is as diverse, as technical, and as urgent as the world we need them to save. Let us build a house that is truly firm, built on the great thoughts of many, not the few. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Oh, thank you, Isaac. What powerful messages for us to hear this evening. Thank you for your reflections. And now we're to respond to Isaac's speech and to offer their own reflections. We're going to have a panel of 3 experts to give very short presentations, and then we're going to open up for discussions. So get your pens ready to write down your thoughts, get ready to share, to ask questions as we bring forward our panellists. So our first panellist, Rachel Bolstad. Rachel is the Kai Hautu Rangahau, the Chief Researcher at the New Zealand Council for Educational Research. Rachel's research explores systemic educational responses to climate change in Aotearoa New Zealand and globally. She has many other interests, including the role of games, gaming and game design in education, place-based education, and schools' relationships to the wider community. Please join me in welcoming Rachel for our next presentation. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nō ngā hau e whā ukuti puna, I tupu ake au I kirikiriroa, e noho ana au kei te whanganui atara, he tangata tiriti au, ko Rachel Bolstad tōku ingoa. We were just saying, oh, hard act to follow, Isaac. That was very inspiring, and I'll just try and add a few thoughts, but a lot of what I will say is really just picking up on really strong messages that you've just shared. That's me. So I've been researching educational policy and practice in relation to climate change since about 2019. So looking both at what's happening here in Aotearoa New Zealand and in other parts of the world. And so if we start with the global picture, there is some good news, and the good news is that education has become more visible in global climate policy conversations. Young people like Isaac and his peers have really pushed for this, and they've been supported by a range of adult allies, researchers, people from NGOs, teacher unions. And at COP28, which I think was 2 COPs ago, around 40 countries, New Zealand not one of them, signed a commitment to a declaration to strengthen climate education. So many countries say that climate education matters, but far fewer have the policy, the resourcing, and the teacher supports to make it systemic. And many teachers want to be doing more. And that's kind of where the challenge and the opportunity rests. So the challenge is that we need much stronger system level support and a clear vision for the role of education in a climate changing world. It can't just sit in one corner of the curriculum. It needs to be woven across all learning areas. And it needs space and time to flourish. And it doesn't just happen inside the classroom. Schools and communities also need opportunities to build resilience and to take meaningful action in their own backyards. So in 2024, NZCER did a national survey of primary schools, and we found about 4 in 10 schools reported that they'd experienced flooding impacts that affected their school and community, which is really high. And we're just asking the same question of secondary schools in the last few months, and it's at least as high, if not higher, which isn't that surprising when we look at how many events we've experienced just in the last 6 months. Over a third of schools also reported that they had provided support to their communities during and after these events. And about 20% had also experienced excessively hot days, and that has an impact on your ability to think and your ability to learn if it's too hot. And that's something that we can also see is happening more frequently. But the opportunity, like Isaac has laid out for us, is that we don't have to wait. And our research shows there's already a lot that educators and communities and young people can do and are doing. So practices on the whole do vary a lot between schools, and quite often they are driven by individual teachers, a school leader, students, or they're happening because schools have got really effective and strong support from other organisations and facilitators. But what it can look like when it's flourishing is schools designing climate conscious curriculum, weaving across all learning areas. It can look like whole school approaches. For example, students might research ways to reduce emissions in their own school, take proposals forward to their principal and board, and actually make meaningful change. And also it looks like learning that connects with place and culture and community. And this can look like working with mana whenua on long-term restoration and climate action projects. It can look like collaborating with local and regional council to bring youth involvement and perspectives into decision-making and climate adaptation planning. And so the research tells us that when young people are involved in this kind of meaningful action-oriented learning, they're not just learning about the problems, but they're actually part of solutions. It can build their sense of agency and their well-being, and their capacity to contribute, and their knowledge. And it's not just subject knowledge, it's knowledge of how systems work, how power operates, how to build and leverage relationships to make change. And because, as Isaac's laid out, this is an intergenerational justice issue. Young people are going to bear the consequences of the decisions that we're making today, but they're often excluded from helping to shape the policy decisions, and they should be at the table. Young people can bring us to creative and diverse perspectives, and they can lead us to better solutions. But it's also important for those of us in the room that are not young anymore to be really good allies to young people, because they do need us. And we need to help make sure that those doors aren't closed on their participation. And you can do that in so many different ways, and whatever your sphere of influence, as a parent, as an educator, as someone who has power and leadership in your various domains. So bringing together those two threads, the sort of system change challenge and the role of young people, I think they sort of point towards a shared responsibility here. And again, Isaac's calls to action, I'll just add further to those. So if you are a policymaker, or if you are someone with decision-making power, how are you creating the conditions to support climate education to flourish? And how are you enabling young people to participate in policy and system design? How do we get Isaac a seat at the table in the curriculum update process? Isaac and young people like him, I think that's a serious question. And I think in the room we should be thinking about that. And if we haven't already got a plan, let's make one. If you're a parent or a member of the community, how can you support and advocate for an education system that treats this as a priority? And if you're a young person, of course, you know, your job is to keep making your voices heard. Don't accept being shut out of the conversation, and find the adult allies that will help you. So on a final note, these are just, I think, some of the critical questions we can ask about our system and policy settings around education. So beyond just thinking about the curriculum in one learning area, let's take the broader view and say, where's the plan, where's the strategy, and how do we work on this together? Kia ora.
Thanks, Rachel. Great insights. Okay, thank you so much, Rachel, and don't forget to start writing down some questions or comments as we move on. My pleasure now to introduce you to Andrea Soanes, who is the Associate Director of the Science Learning Hub, and is also a very experienced secondary school teacher, facilitator, assessment moderator, curriculum and resource developer. Very busy woman. And she brings to her mahi a great passion for science, biology, sustainability, climate change education. And Andrea received the 2018 Kudos Secondary Science Educators Award for significantly enhancing our understanding and appreciation of science within the Waikato and wider community. Kia ora, Andrea. Welcome to the podium to share with us your reflections.
Kia ora koutou. It's always nerve-wracking standing in front of peers, colleagues, and people you don't know, especially after that introduction. But really, I'm just a person passionate about climate change, passionate about education, passionate about science, and the people that live here, right? I just want to absolutely applaud Isaac for your keynote presentation. You show such passion, such drive and agency, and it really came through your presentation, so well done. I'm sure you've heard that a lot, but you, alongside many other youth across the Motu, are driven to make change and constantly come up against barriers that don't allow you to have a voice, that don't allow you to actually take action. And so I think it's about time, isn't it, that we made a change to that. My presentation really is around a call to action. And as educators, we are in a very privileged position. We have the power to either awhi or break our students. And I say that in a very blunt way because it happens and it still continues to happen. We have to really think about what we say when we say it, what we offer our students when we're in a classroom, when we're outside a classroom. And I know that youth will inherit the decisions we make, but we also need to help them as in terms of being a role model okay? We need to actually make sure that what we do is role modelling sustainability, it's role modelling positive dispositions, it's role modelling a future. I hear a lot about people talking about the future is going to be very different to what it is now. And I think one of the biggest things we can actually help our youth with is actually visioning what a future might look like, because there still will be a future. It won't end. There will be a future. We have to hold that hope and actually allow our students to vision what that might look like, whatever it is, whatever they need. Because if they can't vision it, they won't make it happen, right? I did write lots of notes down. I want to touch on one point, though, around, you said, Isaac, around science. Sorry. Ensuring our ākonga have a scientific worldview. And I agree with that. I think science information is important. Science knowledge is important. What we also need to think about are the other subjects, right? So we've got to make sure that we actually embed and incorporate all of our subjects. Building science literacy is hugely important. We live in a world of misinformation, disinformation. If we don't have a good science literacy, if we don't build that understanding and knowledge, how will we distinguish between what is real and what is not? So that is important, but what equally is important is action. Dispositions. How do we build action competence within our students? How do we offer them opportunities to build dispositions that move in a positive way? How do we build their well-being within that process? So my challenge to you all as adults, as educators, is what do you role model in your everyday life? And remembering that it's not just when you're in the classroom, it's when you're walking down the street, it's when you're at the supermarket, it's when you're at events in the community. Every time a student sees you, they are looking at what you are doing. So just think about that. It's not just about the students having a voice in the room, which is incredibly important. It's also about us adults stepping up. Want to touch on when you said about seeing ourselves as scientists or seeing ourselves in science. And using contexts to teach will make things relevant, they'll make things connect for our students, we'll pull in our prior knowledge, what do they know, what we can build on. But unless we have those conversations and actually think about those contexts and pull those extra pieces of information into the classroom, we won't be making a difference. That is the magic between what the curriculum says and what happens in our classroom. This little magic-y bit in the middle, that's what teachers do best, and that's where the power will lie in change. So the story of science is definitely unfinished. There is so much more to do. Well done, Isaac. I'm going to use that again. But we also need to inspire youth to be active citizens, not bystanders. And we live in a global world, right? We're a global ecosystem. And while at the moment it feels very real here, we need to be helping our students think about what happens elsewhere. Those significant life-changing experiences, such as you and the other youth are experiencing, are so vital for you as leaders to actually bring that back and share. So ngā mihi, Isaac. You all in this room, you're all showing us what agency looks like. So I just want you to have a think about that. What is your next step? Kia ora.
Well, thank you very much, Andrea. And our last speaker before we open up for discussion and questions and comments It's my pleasure to introduce a good colleague of mine from the University of Canterbury, Dr. Kate Prendergast. Kate is a leader at the University of Canterbury in the postgraduate program and has led and developed one of our stellar postgraduate courses in sustainable futures and innovation. And her research explores how young people can flourish in sustainable, low-carbon ways in a rapidly changing climate. In 2025, Kate received the American Political Science Association Award for her presentation of a co-authored paper on reimagining civics education in chaotic climate futures. So kia ora, Kate, lovely to have you here tonight, and we look forward to your comments. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kate Prendergast taka ingoa. It's a privilege to be here tonight from Aotearoa Christchurch, where I work at the University of Canterbury. And over the past, it's almost a decade now, that I've been at the University of Canterbury, I've had the pleasure of being able to work and collaborate with an international team of researchers where, like Gail said, our question has been, how can youth flourish in sustainable, low-carbon ways? And so we've been investigating this question across 7 different countries around the world. And a consistent theme that has come up really resonates with what Isaac has talked about. Young people want to be at the decision-making table. But in our research, we've heard from young people, we've heard their frustrations and their concerns that they are consistently excluded and their voices are consistently undermined in decision-making spaces. And so I think it's really, really important that all of us look at ways that we can empower youth and make spaces for youth to be in those decision-making spaces. So Isaac, your reflections and your insights on the 14th UNESCO Youth Forum were really inspiring, really thoughtful, and have put up some challenges to us all. And I just wanted to pick up on something that you said. So you iterated that climate justice and then in turn climate education must be intergenerational. It must integrate Indigenous knowledge systems and it must be youth-centred. And so those 3 challenges to us really resonate with research that we've been doing in Aotearoa Christchurch, where we have been working in, and this goes back to what you were talking about, Rachel, we've been working with 2 schools in a high flood risk area. And we've been particularly working with Māori and Pacific youth. And so I am one of the only Pākehā researchers on that team. It's largely led by Māori and Pacific scholars. And so what inspired this research is that when we look at science or climate education, it's often delivered in instrumental and narrow ways. And so we've really been advocating in our research that we need to embed relational dimensions where we're encouraging students to think about who's defining problems, what worldviews are being incorporated into addressing these problems, and then how can we work together to collectively address these problems. And so through our work, we have been running workshops, and the project started about 4 years ago now, and we've got funding, little bits of funding to keep it going, and we've been working with different groups of students. But through the project, we've followed these 3 steps that you can see up here. So step 1 has focused on how communities have faced challenges in the past. And this has been done through intergenerational dialogue where young people have had the opportunity to talk to matua and elders in their community. And through these conversations, they've identified the stories, the values, the people and the resources that have sustained communities, both in good times, but also in times of challenge. And Isaac, again, you talked about looking at how Pacific people and Pacific knowledge systems have sustained their communities through environmental change. And so I think it's really important that young people hear those stories. So young people brought those insights into step 2, where they explored a local environmental issue. And the young people identified what those issues were. So for example, when we're working with the Māori students, they identified that their marakai, their food garden, regularly flooded. And so they wanted to address this issue in their community. And so with them, they heard about some of the scientific reasons why their marakai might be flooding, but they also had the opportunity to go to a site significant to the local hapu and learn about traditional planting methods. And they've incorporated those planting methods within their marakai. These students also heard from Māori scientists who are working within the science space, and they are actively braiding together mataranga Māori and Western science in their day-to-day mahi. And then finally, we wanted to empower the students to continue to take action. So in step 3, we focused on building the capability for students to understand and influence systems of power. So again, with the Māori students we were working with, they requested lobbying lessons from us. So we did role play and they learnt approaches to lobby for change. With the Pacific students that we were working with, they wanted to engage with decision makers. So we facilitated an opportunity for them to go to council. They spent time in council chambers and they presented both their problem and their solution to local councillors. And some of these solutions have been implemented. And so I just wanted to put this up as an example of how we can think about intergenerational learning pathways, how we can think about braiding knowledge systems, and how we can think about weaving through those relational aspects and empowering young people to make change. So thank you for your wonderful kōrero, Isaac. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, audience participation time. I'm going to invite our panellists, Isaac and our 3 experts here tonight. And we'll just go on to that slide there. And open up to our audience first up to ask questions, to comment, to give some reflections, and maybe even to challenge our panellists. So kia ora, I'll open the floor. Okay, well, I might pose a first question to one of our panellists while we're warming up. Audience participation time. Oh, here we go. Very brave. Kia ora. We have got a microphone coming, actually, just... oh, thank you. Just so we can all hear your wonderful question. Kia ora.
I'm Subhash Chand and I'm studying to be a teacher. I'm currently studying at Victoria University for a graduate diploma of teaching in primary. A question I would like to ask is, Isaac attended the conference in Uzbekistan and there were 145 around participants and they discussed about climate change. I would particularly touch upon global warming. During the discussion, what were the top causes of global warming? And we talk a lot about vehicles, cars, and moving on to EV, but was methane gas produced by the cows, was that a cause of global warming? Was that one of the reasons? Did it come up or was it discussed? That's my question.
Kia ora. Thank you for the question. Starting off with a tricky one. Yes, fossil fuels and the negative implication of fossil fuels etc., was one of the topics that came up that the youth were quite passionate about in terms of global warming and moving to a greener economy in terms of more sustainable energy production. I have to be careful about how I position this, of course, but remember that, noting that, of course, the young people are very passionate about calling on member states and the commitments that we will make against fossil fuels, etc. But whether or not that gets adopted, and kind of going down this line of, do we be really loud and push for really intense, like stripping away basically of negative environmental factors that contribute to global warming and climate change? Or do we find a middle ground where we're able to position the youth voice that still makes progress with member states and their governments while still advocating for a cleaner, greener economy? I think that's where we had to find that balance. So many young people were very passionate. They called out global warming, fossil fuels, energy production that had negative implications on the environment, and there was a laundry list, but we can't cover everything. And the document was already as long as it possibly could be. And I think it's an iterative process where if we can get some quick wins, still within the time frame that we have, where we have a short time frame, but then building on that to get momentum. But it's a great call out. Like, it's not just about climate change. There are so many factors that we could tackle in this. And ultimately it comes down to also UNESCO and what UNESCO's priority areas are, because there are other UN agencies that might look at this a little bit closer, and I think we have to come back to that as well. We're going there for UNESCO and the UNESCO pillars and what we have influence over. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Isaac. Great answer. You're talented at this. Kia ora. Question up the back.
Hi, Max McNaughton. I am a Year 13 student at Wellington High School, and this is sort of a question for the whole panel, but there's been a lot of talk about the integration of Indigenous knowledge into sustainability measures, like the science of sustaining coral reefs, for example, was mentioned. But what about more recently identified issues to do with the climate that are sort of on a wider scale and have been hard to notice until we've gotten like better, I guess, measuring technologies, like ocean acidification comes to mind? How can we integrate Indigenous knowledge into more contemporary climate issues?
Kia ora. Excellent question. Who would like to tackle that one from our panellists? Kate's going to have a go. Kia ora, Kate.
Kia ora, thank you for your question. So I think when we think about Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous people have, like when we think about the Pacific Islands, they've been responding to environmental change for millennia. And I think it's really important that Indigenous people have a seat at the table so that they can respond to questions like yours, because, yeah, that's how Indigenous people have survived and thrived, for longer than we've been here.
What came to mind for me was there's a project called NUWAO, N-U-W-A-O. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for, but it was a project that's worked in Oceania, Pacific and New Zealand, and Haimana knows because we went to a conference about it together, looking at the idea of nature-based solutions is a big idea in climate adaptation, and even calling it nature-based solutions kind of sometimes puts it in a little bit of like a Western way of thinking about environment. And so the NUWAO project was really about looking at Indigenous knowledge solutions from across different Pacific and Aotearoa communities, and how those could provide us with almost like an encyclopedia of nature-based solutions for climate adaptation that are drawing on these other knowledge systems. And they were kind of working on a website that was almost like a little directory or encyclopedia. So have a look at that. and that might help you sort of spiral into other sources that could help take you a bit deeper.
I'll give this one a crack. So kia ora, thank you for the question. One thing that I ponder on a lot, especially with the other youth leaders, is around the validity of mātauranga Māori or Indigenous science. So I try and marry the Western science versus mātauranga Māori. I often don't look at it as two separate systems. I look at one and the same. It's all science, just a different perspective on it. But one thing that, to your question, it's around, Isaac, you mentioned Rahui, and look at other contemporary issues like ocean acidification, what are ways that we weave in Indigenous knowledge systems. I would take a few steps back and look at why maybe Indigenous knowledge systems haven't been validated as a source of truth. When we look at Western institutions, science comes out as it's being valid because it's come from an institution that has paid for that research, it's been cited and published and therefore is valid. A lot of Indigenous science doesn't necessarily follow that same methodology, but it has as the same scientific validation. It is true, and it has sustained communities for thousands of years, but that knowledge system hasn't necessarily gone through that validation process through a Western university institution. And so I think there are these nuggets of ideas and problems that can be solved through Indigenous knowledge systems and communities that don't have access to a Western institution model of validating it, and that we would find many answers to problems that we face today, but that are sitting somewhere with communities and individuals who don't have that validity necessarily to be accepted as science. Sorry if that answers.
Yeah, kia ora, kia ora. Next question, kia ora.
Kia ora. Oh, that's really loud. I just really liked the idea that a lot of you guys touched on about taking the data and the classical Western science and then overlaying it with stories to kind of give it soul and make it resonate with people. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how you navigate that and kind of where you draw the line in terms of keeping people on side with keeping it not credible, but not coming at it with too much of an angle or a perspective. Yeah.
Andrea.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think in terms of what we would do in a classroom is around building the context, telling the story, but then encouraging the students to actually form their own opinions from that. Right, so it's about that helping youth understand how to question, how do I interpret, what is my prior knowledge and how does that overlay on what I've just heard? How does that shift my thinking to perhaps what my family values might be, dare I say it? You know, how it's around challenging thoughts and shifting those forwards with new information. So in terms of going too far or what's the line, I think as an educator you do have to really think about that. You have to think about the balancing of information, but in terms of an educator's role, it really is around, here are some scenarios, here are some contexts, what do you think about that and how can I help you shape your thinking around that and therefore your actions?
Kia ora. Kia ora, question over here.
Kia ora. So we're from Wellington College, and I guess as I'm one of the teachers there, it's really easy for us in the science department to incorporate a whole bunch of this climate questioning amongst our students. But I guess I've kind of got two questions. For us science teachers, how can we kind of inspire and start passing that ease that we have in our curriculum to the other teachers in our school to make it more of a whole curriculum-wide and whole school-wide effort, and maybe provide resources in that, which I know is kind of a vague question. But my other question is more kind of for the students in the room, which really good job for coming after school, especially after training for some of you, full day. I guess it can be a little bit overwhelming for everyone to hear all of this information, and I'm wondering if anybody has any kind of very easy, actionable things that maybe these students can take away from this that is I say actionable because it's a little bit hard to just take these concepts of have good climate awareness and things like that. So I guess those are my two questions. Thank you.
Kia ora, open to the panel.
Keep switching the mic off. What I have seen happen in other schools is, to answer your first question and kind of to answer your second question, thinking about, as teachers, we've got some ideas. We're keen to try and create something that's a bit more of like an interdisciplinary climate course. I'm from science, I'm from social science, I'm from philosophy, we're keen, how do we do it? Well, one of the first things that school did was they convened a forum with their students and they asked them, what would you like to see in a climate course and what would you hope comes out of it? And actually they got lots of really good input from the students, and it ranged from, the sort of things they wanted to know, but also they wanted to understand like how power systems work, and they wanted to understand how to kind of map influence. They wanted to know how to like not feel depressed and overwhelmed. And so the teachers then were able to use that as the basis for the course that they designed the following year, and they kind of carved up different parts of the whole program that were delivered. So in the science, they focused really on science understandings around climate, and they looked at climate solutions. In social sciences, they looked at all sorts of things, including like well-being and how can you create space and ensure that you're looking after yourself and taking actions that are good for yourself, the community and other people. And in the philosophy component, they were coming back to what Andrea said, learning how to take the time and space to like reflect on where do their own ideas about the environment come from, where do their own values come from. And actually that does take a lot of time and space and good, skillful teaching to actually allow those conversations to really play out. That's my thoughts.
Yes, and I imagine, Isaac, being surrounded by 145 other youth passionate leaders from around the globe. While you're there, you've got all this amazing energy and passion and ideas. You come back to your own countries, and then what's next? Now, I heard you mention something about youth climate labs. Does that relate to this at all? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, so one of the concepts that we had a long discussion about, so effectively to create this document of all these suggestions and recommendations to present back to all the member states took like months and months. But Youth Climate Labs was this idea where it's really practical. It could be called anything really, but we came up with that name. It's around like ocean science, it's around marine science, it's around really practical ways of engaging with environment and environmental awareness for young people, and being supported with funding, with technical mentorship if applicable, and discovery. Because not every child will go to a school where they have like an eco-enviro group. Or there was a young man, I think from Wellington College, who's in Bird and Forest, who came earlier. He was awesome. And a lot of young people end up having to go into their communities to participate in some of these activities because their schools are under-resourced. And that was kind of the idea, was between teachers being stretched and educators being stretched, are there ways that communities, local communities, etc., could step up and provide a space where kids can be really involved? And so one example of this, which wouldn't necessarily be a youth climate lab, but would be adjacent to that, is the Marine Education and or MIRC in Auckland. So they have a lot of workshops for kids where they can do like shark dissection, but actually the shark dissection is understanding around the reasons why sharks are being washed up, and like through trawl fishing and all of that, and they get caught up. These really practical everyday examples of, like it's educative, but it's community run, hopefully funded by different parties. We help fund MIRC, and the kids come away and they learn something new and practical that doesn't necessarily have to just be in their school sometimes. And And as you mentioned, Gail, there were so many, I felt like quite an imposter because I was like, whoa, I'm no Greta Thunberg. And like these young people were doing some really cool stuff in their countries. And I came away inspired, slightly disenfranchised a little bit, because I was like, oh man, like there's so much to do. Yeah. But I don't want young people to be disenfranchised. I don't want the future to look bleak. We should envision a future that's beautiful and amazing. And I just think about all the different things that I did in school, which is quite a while ago now, but which seems really simple, but kind of created that mindset around looking after our country and our environment, like tree planting in year 10 science, and all the boys were just throwing the plants around like willy-nilly. But, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of us ended up going to more tree planting sessions in the community because of that. So there are these really practical, hands-on, easy ways of doing it. And I would come back to the idea of many young people being maybe imperfect activists, for example. Like, you don't have to now everything can be the most perfect, environmentally conscious person ever. Like, for example, I should probably use my keep cup instead of having a disposable coffee cup every time I get coffee. But that's just something that I consciously have to think about, and that's okay. We're not going to be perfect, but if we can all make a difference, that's better than nothing, I suppose.
Yes, I think we have to talk to some of our movie directors so that all the futuristic films aren't always bleak and depressing. We need some happy endings. But really good points about what you can take home practically. And just before the next question, just following up on that, if some of our young people here wanted to start like a mini climate lab, are there online resources to get people supported? Andrea, you're in the development of resources. What's available to our schools immediately to pick up some of these conversations, get some action going within their local school?
Yeah, well, the Science Learning Hub is an online website, obviously online, funded by government, funded by MBIE. It has a wealth of resources for teachers and students. We've produced Climate Change Planning Pathways Interactive, which can give lots of different angles where educators can attack climate change in the classroom. We've got Ethics Toolkit, we've got Future Thinking Toolkits. So yeah, have a look in there. Always welcome for questions. If there's something specifically you want to work on and you can't find the information, just ask and we will track it down for you. Maybe even connect you with appropriate people.
Wow, amazing offer. You heard it here tonight. Kia ora, thank you for that, Andrea. Mita, question, kia ora.
So kia ora, thank you so much for very, very insightful, inspiring talks. So as person working with AI, I was sitting here and cringing and thinking that I can't stop thinking of the impact of AI in our future. And I was hearing just before that the practical way that we can be mindful. And today we're seeing that AI impacting every aspect of our lives, and it's just going to be more and more as we are, seeing that very advanced development of these technologies. So what would be what would be a meaningful lessons for our young generation around AI and climate beyond, what we have in year 9 and 10 as ethics and AI, that they can really learn about it. So what are your views on that? So I would really like to see how we can have this discussion, talk about, good, bad, ugly side of this technology, but the biggest one is climate. So I would love to hear from you.
Well, that's a big question and one that's so important. I think there's two aspects there. There's the environmental impact of AI, which I think there is not a lot of information out there about. It's not in the media, I don't think. So that's one aspect. So that's a context to look at in a classroom, or whoever wants to look at it. What are the impacts environmentally of AI and data storage? The other aspect really is around, and I'm going to come at it from quite a different angle maybe, is around actually a sense of belonging and who you are as a person and what your value set is around what you know about AI. And that might shift over time, right? But that sense of belonging in who we are as a people or as a person, as a collective, what we deem to be ethically okay, is really important to encourage in your students, that disposition of, who am I?
I heard somebody who's a kind of much more expert in AI than I am talking about this, and one of the things he talked about was that there's, like, coming back to the theme of tonight, you know, challenges and opportunities. And at the moment, you know, like, we do hear about the energy use and the water use with AI, and he was talking about, you know, the opportunities to think about how we can actually make use of all that heat in productive ways. So why aren't we using that intentionally to heat water where we do want heated water instead of heating up the ocean or whatnot? So I don't have a full answer to your question, but last year our organisation surveyed teachers about AI use, primary teachers, and their perceptions of it. And an interesting data point in there is we asked teachers about their concerns about the environmental impact, and we also asked a question like whether they think that the benefits of AI will outweigh or eventually kind of like cancel out the negative impacts, and people were quite optimistic about it, which I find really interesting. And so I think we need to do more to unpack the information so that we can actually see if it is our optimism founded, you know, and if we do want to kind of make the most of it. So yeah, it's really interesting. Great question.
Kia ora. Oh, hands are shooting up everywhere. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I want to preface this with saying I respect your talk on focus on lobbying and an intergenerational cooperation. However, as a young person of myself, how do I not lose hope when I do not have power over decisions happening, such as like just recent removals of the clean car discount, or adding more LNG, or keeping bottom trawling? Like, how do I not lose hope when I can't have power over those decisions?
Isaac, I can see you're itching to answer this one. Kia ora.
That's a great question, and thank you for asking a good question, like a tough question and challenging. I don't think there's a perfect answer for me to propose, but one thing that I would say, how do I not feel down about either my situation around the future I will inherit or my nieces or nephews will inherit, is because I know that there are more people doing good than bad. And when I go out into local communities and I see like people doing stuff at the beach, like marine education or picking up rubbish, and yes, there are bigger systemic issues, don't get me wrong. Like, there are things that are far above the small guys doing stuff on the ground, but the small guys that are doing stuff that add up, the sum of all the small people doing really good work makes me feel better about my situation. And there are two parts to it, I think. There's one around having people in these institutions that hopefully are trying to push for change and do good, and equally having people on the outside banging on the door and holding them accountable for doing good stuff. And I try and like live to that idea of those two parties, people on the inside doing incremental systemic change to try and make things better, and then the public or the community on the outside holding them to account. And now that, just coming back to your question, the science teacher too, and I'm not sure if this would be in the school, but think about some of the policy that has come through over the last few years, and how many young people have mobilized to write submissions or to protest perhaps, and to make their voices heard. And the overwhelming majority of young people I see showing up has made me feel a little bit better. And so I truly believe that eventually, hopefully, that the majority will end up making a difference for the small minority who aren't.
Kia ora.
Can I just add to that and say, talk about how you're feeling, because actually I'm sure I'm not alone here as an adult. Like, I felt all those feelings, I feel them all the time as well. And yet here I am, here we all are still trying to go. So talk to people, talk to adults, and don't just let people fob you off and delegitimize how you're feeling, because actually even the adults that kind of avoid it and don't want to talk about it, that they've got feelings about it, and you know you're actually making a space where it allows them permission to talk about their fears too.
Kate, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so in research we do see that a lot of young people are worried about the changing climate. I think a survey showed around 60% of young people were worried around the world. And I think it's really important to be part of a collective, because climate change is not just for you to solve. It's about, surrounding yourself with people. And like Isaac said, using the tools that are available to you. So doing the submission writing, organising protests, but being with other people, I think is super, super important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's really important that we're open about how we feel about this. And I'm a little bit older than you. I just guessing.
Just a little.
I felt like that when I was young, and I've had a few more years under my belt, and I've seen massive change. It might not be we haven't shifted the world climate, but we have been making change, and we have been shifting slowly, steadily. It's like the turtle wins the race. Keep putting the submissions in, keep having a voice. It's hard work when you get sort of all these barriers, but keep doing it. I did. I kept going and going. I was called all sorts of names when I was teaching in school because nobody else believed that I was making a difference. But you just keep going and going. You be the disruptor, all right? Every little submission will make a difference. You might not see it at the start, but every little bit you do will collectively add up to change. Well done.
Kia ora. Well,
Sorry, we do have one that's been
okay.
waiting a
We've
while.
got time for a couple more before refreshments and chance to meet and mingle. So we'll take two more.
Kia ora, I'm Yusuf. I'm a year 12 at Wellington College. Isaac, earlier you said that the rangatahi should envision like a beautiful future. So that's quite a broad term. What would that look like to you?
Paint your beautiful picture for us.
I take that back. I'm kidding. no,
Great question.
It sounds cheesy, but I always come back to like the UNESCO's mission of like fostering world peace through understanding each other's cultures, building like being really collaborative. One of the coolest things was seeing how many different countries were willing to work together to solve the biggest problems. And one of my biggest fears is that we become really insular and we all think about ourselves as individuals or as like on a country level or a national level or city level, like we just be really individualistic. A beautiful future to me is that we think about the collective and that we think about the person who's maybe a bit behind us and how we can lift them up. And that will look like many things to many different people. But I think as much as we can, where we're constantly thinking about how we make life a little bit easier for the other person, that to me is like what a beautiful future looks like, is that we're collectively helping each other and that we're trying to solve these big issues and we're working together to do that. And is that aspirational? Perhaps, but again, there have been so many changes and there are peaks and troughs throughout human history where we go into these periods where things are a little bit bleak and then we come out and we make a lot of progress. And so I don't think it's impossible. I think it will just take a little bit of change to be able to get to there. I don't know if that, hopefully that answers your question, but yeah, great question.
Kia ora. Couple over here.
Te whare o te whakaaro nui a tēnā koutou. Mau I whakatakoto mai I ngā hua ki mui I te aroaro o tēnei mininga. Hei wānangananga. I want to lean into what you said, Isaac, in terms of people imagining themselves in science and how you especially said that the manosphere that was there and how that, women need to see them in there too. And so I want to touch on that. But my question isn't really for you, it's for your other three colleagues sitting there, because we're all in education, eh? My question is basically this: how do we say education is the answer? However, we all know that education makes us do certain things. Like we have to test our young people, right? We have to put them through these things that they have to reach in order for them to to pass through to the next level in which we can all sit and, be, feel great about our education. I'm wondering whether or not, in terms of the climate, when we're going to need everyone and no one's going to be a failure, what parts of education are worthy of holding on to in our current education format, and what are the things that we as educators should actually let go of? Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora. Good question. Rachel, with education policy hat on, have you got any reflections for us on that?
It's good, and it's a hard question, obviously, because if we figured it out, would have you and me and many others would have really tried to make it happen. But I think you've sort of touched on an important point, which is that education can sometimes be the problem as well as the solution. And education is really good at sort of self-reinforcing itself on its own tracks that it's been on for a long time, and it's not always that good at responding and changing to the world as it changes. And part of that, I think, happens because we end up, sort of siloing happens all the way down. It happens in the way that knowledge gets split up. It happens in the way that, we kind of end up having oftentimes assessment driving curriculum rather than curriculum driving curriculum. And we also have, sometimes we swing back and forth again to this thing where we don't trust teachers and we don't really invest in teachers as the skilled, professional, knowledgeable people who are kind of know how to best bring to life learning for their students in their context, and we move towards something that's more, trying to make it one size fits all. So I think part of it is seeing all the connections between those things and kind of coming back to my earlier slide, if we want to address climate through education, we've got to look at all the parts of education and look at, are these things helping us move in the right direction, or are these things preventing us from doing what we need to be doing? And the more we can have those conversations and the more we can normalise that thinking, not just amongst people in the education sector, because there's this other thing too, where if you're in education, you kind of understand the machinery and how things work and why things are the way they are, but for people in the wider community, they've only got their own experience of school sometimes to draw on, and so they can't kind of engage in the level of detail that we could about what needs to change. So I think, having those conversations, having them, and highlighting what really good practice looks like, even if it's not, what's currently we're being told is what we should be doing.
Yeah. Kia ora. Well, we've certainly opened up lots of discussion, but I'm going to close this part of the session in a moment so we can engage with some refreshments and continue the conversation. You can meet our youth leaders. But what an important kaupapa this is. And I just want to mihi to you and honour every one of you who is here tonight to focus on this important conversation to be continued, obviously. But it is a good time for us in our country as we think about our curriculum, as we think about how we can get involved, as we think about how we can support our youth and our young people to get engaged in climate action. And that's what UNESCO's here is about. It is about recognising that education, science and culture are really powerful tools to help us with these challenges. So Liz, did you want to offer a few reflections just before our closing karakia? But thank you for being here, and please do join us in some refreshments and continue the conversation.
Sorry, beg your pardon. Look, I'm being really sneaky. I'm sorry. It's what happens when you sit in the front row. because with these experts here, Gail, I just wanted to sneak in one last question. I want to take us right back around to where we started, because we've had philosophy, innovation, richness, profound commentary and thinking and questions. And I want to go back to the very prosaic and see if each of our specialists, our experts here, very quickly could tell us one thing that you might want to see in your wish list for the new science curriculum. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see? Just if you could quick fire down the line.
Great opportunity to feed in. A consultation, I believe, is still open till next month, and we will certainly send a briefing of our kōrero here tonight and Isaac's speech to our Ministry of Education advisors in this area, so they can also reflect on that. But your quick thoughts, Rachel?
Oh, this is so bad, but my response is actually beyond the science curriculum, because we've got 8 learning areas, and we need to have all these ideas embedded throughout. So I want people to also think about giving feedback on those, and the front end part of the curriculum, Te Mātai Aho, which actually is supposed to set out, what's the purpose for learning, and what are the, what kind of people do we want our young people to become through education. And there's a couple of things missing out of that at the moment. There's no vision for young people. There was a draft of that circulating a few years ago, so you might want to point that out. And things like the competency of participating and contributing is not in there anymore. And I think that's a big red flag, given everything we've heard about today. So don't forget about the other learning areas.
Kia ora. Isaac?
I think the youth climate labs are probably the most exciting thing for me, because it's so interdisciplinary and it's very practical, and so theoretical and the practical application of applying some of these knowledge systems. So I think I've proposed to introduce that at Year 10. I think it's a budding time just before they get into their specialisation in science, if they decide to do that. Yeah, that would be my...
Kia ora. Andrea?
Yeah, well, it's that interconnectedness, isn't it, across the curriculum is really important, and I think that's missing. Do look at the other subject areas as well, particularly social sciences. There is aspects in there that cross over with science. Activity shifting towards action is what I would love to see within this curriculum document. Even if it's not in the curriculum document, it's best practice. So shifting activities to action. And if you want to unpack what that means, talk to me later.
And Kate?
So I would like to see within the science curriculum, but across the curriculum, a greater focus on relationships. So relationships with, embedding science within the context of relationships with people, with other species, with communities, knowledge systems and ecosystems.
Great advice. Well, please join me in thanking our expert presenters and Isaac Morunga. And we'll stand for our closing karakia before our refreshments. Una hia, ki te uru tapunui, kia wātea, kia mama, ti nāko, ti tinana, ti wairua i te ara takata. Koia rā I rongo, whakaraia aki ki ranga. Kia tina, huie, tai ki e. Kia ora everyone, refreshments are just outside there. Thank you.